A billionaire, about to marry in a lavish ceremony, decides to invite a humble woman from his past, intending to humiliate her publicly. On the big day, she shows up in dirty clothes with 3 6-year-old children, triplets, leaving everyone stunned. What he does in front of everyone, upon discovering who the children are, shocks not only the guests but changes the course of the entire ceremony. Before we start, if you'd like, you can tell us which country you're watching from. Please hit the like button if you're enjoying this content, and subscribe to our channel to stay updated. The crystal chandeliers of the Grandview estate cast dancing shadows across marble floors worth more than most people's homes. Outside, a fleet of Bentleys and Rolls-Royces lined the circular driveway like gleaming soldiers, their polished surfaces reflecting the autumn sun. This was to be the wedding of the century. Tech billionaire Marcus Blackstone marrying socialite Victoria Pemberton in a ceremony that would cost more than many small towns' annual budgets. Marcus adjusted his custom Italian tuxedo, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he surveyed his kingdom of wealth. At 42, he had built an empire from nothing, clawing his way to the top with ruthless determination. Today wasn't just about marrying Victoria. It was about proving once again that he stood above everyone else, untouchable in his tower of success. "The guests are arriving, sir," his assistant whispered, tablet in hand. "The governor, 3 senators, Hollywood royalty. Everyone who matters is here." But Marcus wasn't thinking about the powerful elite filling his ballroom. His mind was focused on one particular invitation he'd sent, a cruel joke that would provide the perfect entertainment for his wedding day. 3 weeks ago, he'd encountered Sarah Mitchell at a coffee shop downtown. A single mother working 2 jobs, dirt under her fingernails, desperation in her eyes as she counted crumpled bills to pay for a simple cup of coffee. Something about her had triggered a memory, a flash of recognition that both intrigued and infuriated him. So he'd done what any billionaire drunk on power would do. He'd invited her to his wedding, knowing she couldn't possibly fit in, knowing she'd become the evening's laughingstock. The invitation had been hand-delivered to her rundown apartment building with a note. "Come as you are." Now as the ceremony began, Marcus stood at the altar watching Victoria glide down the aisle in her $100,000 dress, her diamond tiara catching the light like captured stars. The minister's words washed over him as he scanned the crowd for his unwitting entertainment. Where was his little poverty project? Had she been too ashamed to show? Too smart to walk into his trap? Then, just as the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, the ballroom's massive oak doors creaked open. Every head turned. Every conversation died. Sarah Mitchell stepped into the doorway, and she was exactly what Marcus had hoped for, a walking disaster that would remind everyone of their superiority. Her dress, if it could be called that, was a faded blue cotton sundress with visible stains and patches. Her shoes were worn sneakers with holes. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup, no jewelry except for a thin wedding band on her right hand. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, holding hands in a perfect line, came 3 of the most beautiful children Marcus had ever seen. Identical triplets, 2 boys and 1 girl, all with striking platinum blonde hair and the most unusual violet eyes. They wore clean but obviously second-hand clothes, pressed khakis and polo shirts that had seen better days, but they carried themselves with a dignity that seemed impossible for 6-year-old children from poverty. A ripple of whispers swept through the crowd like poison in water. Who is that woman? How did she get in here? Look at those dirty clothes. Security should remove them immediately. Victoria's face went white beneath her foundation. This was supposed to be her perfect day, and some homeless-looking woman with her children was ruining everything. She shot Marcus a look that could have melted steel, but he held up a subtle hand. Not yet. This was just getting interesting. Sarah walked down the center aisle with her head held high, seemingly oblivious to the cruel stares and whispered insults. The children followed, their violet eyes scanning the opulent room with an intelligence that made several guests uncomfortable. There was something unsettling about how they moved together, how they seemed to communicate without words, how they observed everything with the precision of scientists studying specimens. Marcus felt a strange chill as the family approached. Up close, there was something hauntingly familiar about Sarah's face, something that tugged at memories he'd buried deep. And those children. There was something about them that didn't fit the narrative he'd constructed. Despite their poverty, they radiated an otherworldly grace as if they were visiting from another realm entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom, "it appears we have some unexpected guests. How charming." The word charming dripped with such condescension that several guests laughed nervously. This was clearly some sort of elaborate humiliation, and they were eager to see how it would unfold. Cell phones emerged discreetly. This would be social media gold. But as Sarah and her children took seats in the very back row, one of the boys, the one on the left, turned and looked directly at Marcus with those impossible violet eyes. For just a moment, Marcus felt his confidence waver. There was something in that child's gaze, something that suggested the boy could see right through him, past his wealth and power to something Marcus had tried very hard to forget. The ceremony continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. What should have been a celebration of love and union now felt like a stage set for something much more dramatic. Marcus found himself distracted, stealing glances at the unlikely family in the back row. Sarah sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her face serene despite the hostile environment. The children flanked her like tiny guardians, their violet eyes never leaving the wedding party. As Victoria repeated her vows, her voice tight with barely controlled fury, Marcus realized his cruel joke might be about to backfire in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Because those children weren't just watching the ceremony. They were studying him. The reception hall blazed with 10,000 fairy lights and enough flowers to stock a dozen florists. Ice sculptures carved into swans held bottles of champagne worth more than most people's monthly salary, while servers in crisp uniforms glided between tables carrying golden trays of delicacies most of the guests couldn't even pronounce. Sarah Mitchell had found a table in the far corner, as far from the spotlight as possible. Her 3 children sat beside her, their violet eyes taking in every detail of the lavish display with an intensity that would have been disturbing if anyone had been paying attention. But the elite guests were too busy performing their own social theater to notice the careful way the triplets catalogued each face, each gesture, each cruel comment whispered behind jeweled hands. "Mommy," whispered Emma, the only girl among the triplets. "Why did the man in the expensive suit invite us here?" Sarah smoothed her daughter's platinum hair, her work-roughened fingers gentle against the silky strands. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people do things for reasons that aren't immediately clear. We're here because..." She paused, searching for words that wouldn't burden her children with adult cruelties. "Because sometimes the universe has plans we don't understand." Ethan, Emma's brother, leaned closer. "He wanted to embarrass us," he said matter-of-factly, his 6-year-old voice carrying a wisdom that shouldn't have existed. "He thinks we don't belong here because we're poor." The third triplet, Evan, nodded solemnly. "But he doesn't know about us, does he, Mommy? He doesn't know what we can do." Sarah's breath caught. This was exactly what she'd feared, that bringing the children here would trigger their abilities. "Remember what we talked about," she whispered urgently. "We have to be careful. We have to be normal." "But we're not normal," Emma said simply. "We never have been." Across the ballroom, Marcus held court at the head table, regaling his wealthy friends with exaggerated stories of his business conquests. But his eyes kept drifting to the corner where Sarah sat with her impossible children. Every time he looked, they seemed to be looking back, and it was starting to unnerve him in ways he couldn't explain. "Marcus, darling," Victoria hissed through her painted smile, "when are you going to have security remove those people? They're ruining our photos." "Soon," Marcus murmured, but he made no move to summon security. There was something happening here, something he needed to understand. That nagging sense of recognition wouldn't leave him alone. Where had he seen Sarah before? And why did looking at those children make him feel like he was standing on the edge of a cliff? The answer came crashing back to him during the best man's speech, when Robert Pemberton, Victoria's brother and Marcus's oldest friend, raised his glass and began telling the story of how the happy couple met. 5 years ago, my sister was volunteering at the children's hospital when she met our brilliant groom. Robert began, his voice carrying across the ballroom. Marcus was there visiting sick kids, being his usual generous self, when Victoria walked into the room and their eyes met across a little girl's hospital bed. It was love at first sight. The crowd applauded, but Marcus barely heard them. Children's hospital. 5 years ago. The memory hit him like a physical blow, so sudden and vivid that he nearly dropped his champagne glass. He hadn't been visiting sick kids out of generosity. He'd been there for business. The hospital board had been considering his company for a major technology upgrade, and he'd gone to schmooze the directors. But he'd gotten lost in the maze of corridors and wandered into the wrong wing entirely. The pediatric ward, where he'd encountered a young woman sitting beside a bed containing 3 tiny premature babies, all connected to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. She'd been crying, quiet, desperate tears that spoke of exhaustion and terror, and a love so fierce it could have moved mountains. "Excuse me," he'd said, checking his expensive watch impatiently. "I'm looking for the administrative offices." She'd looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes, and even through her grief he'd recognized her beauty, the kind of natural elegance that couldn't be bought or surgically enhanced. "Third floor," she'd whispered. "Take the elevator past the gift shop." He'd started to leave, but something had made him pause. "Your children?" "Triplets," she'd said, her voice breaking. "Born at 26 weeks, the doctors say." She'd covered her mouth, unable to finish the sentence. Marcus remembered feeling uncomfortable, out of place in this sanctuary of suffering. But he'd also felt something else, something he'd quickly buried beneath his usual armor of indifference. "What are their chances?" he'd heard himself ask. "Emma has a 10% chance of surviving without severe brain damage. The boys." She'd shaken her head. "They're fighting, but the doctors say it's unlikely they'll all make it. And even if they do, the costs." She'd gestured helplessly at the machines keeping her babies alive. Marcus had left without another word, pushing the encounter from his mind as he closed his hospital deal and met Victoria later that same day. He'd never given the desperate mother another thought. Until now. Now, as he stared across the ballroom at Sarah and her 3 magnificent children who should have been brain damaged or dead according to those long-ago doctors, the full weight of his cruelty crashed down on him. He hadn't invited some random poor woman to humiliate. He'd invited the mother whose heart he'd witnessed breaking 5 years ago. The mother whose children had defied every medical prediction to become these extraordinary beings with their impossible violet eyes. "Marcus?" Victoria's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You look like you've seen a ghost." But Marcus wasn't looking at Victoria anymore. He was watching Ethan, one of the triplets who had stood up from his corner table and was walking with quiet purpose toward the dance floor. The boy moved with an eerie confidence, his violet eyes fixed on something only he could see. Every instinct Marcus possessed screamed that he should stop whatever was about to happen. But he was too shocked to move, too paralyzed by the weight of recognition and the growing certainty that his cruel joke was about to become something far more significant than he'd ever imagined. Because that 6-year-old boy wasn't just walking onto the dance floor, he was walking toward destiny. The orchestra was playing Pachelbel's Canon when Ethan reached the center of the dance floor. The 6-year-old boy stood perfectly still for a moment, his platinum hair catching the light from the crystal chandeliers above, his violet eyes scanning the crowd of wealthy guests who had fallen silent at this unexpected interruption. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water. Every fiber of his being screamed that he should intervene, should send security to remove the child before. Before what? He didn't know, but something primal in his gut told him that whatever was about to happen would change everything. "What is that child doing?" Victoria hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into Marcus's arm. "This is completely inappropriate." But Marcus couldn't move. He was transfixed by the boy's impossible composure, by the way Ethan seemed to command the attention of 300 of the most powerful people in the city without saying a single word. Then Ethan began to speak. "My name is Ethan Mitchell," the boy said, his 6-year-old voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom without any amplification. 5 years ago, my brother, my sister, and I were born 3.5 months early. The doctors told my mother we had less than a 10% chance of surviving, And if we did survive, we would likely have severe brain damage. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several guests looked uncomfortable. This wasn't the kind of entertainment they'd expected at a society wedding. But we didn't just survive, Ethan continued, his violet eyes finding Marcus across the room and holding his gaze with an intensity that made the billionaire's hands shake. We became something the doctors couldn't explain, something that scared them, something that makes us different. Sarah had risen from her corner table, her face pale with terror. "Ethan," she whispered, but her voice didn't carry, and her son gave no indication that he'd heard her. "Today, a very wealthy man invited my family to his wedding," Ethan said, his voice still eerily calm. "He thought it would be funny to watch poor people embarrass themselves among rich people. He wanted to feel superior, to remind himself how much better he is than everyone else." Marcus felt the eyes of every guest turning toward him. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. This child, this impossible, magnificent child, was dismantling his world with the precision of a surgeon. "But what this wealthy man doesn't know," Ethan continued, "is that my brother, my sister, and I remember everything. We remember being in those hospital machines. We remember hearing the doctor say we would die. And we remember the night a man in an expensive suit walked into our room and saw our mother crying. The ballroom had become a tomb. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, could feel sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. This was impossible. Ethan had been barely clinging to life 5 years ago, his brain the size of a walnut, his neural pathways undeveloped. He couldn't possibly remember. "We remember," Emma said, appearing beside her brother as if she'd materialized from thin air. "We remember everything that happened in that room." Evan joined his siblings, completing the triangle. 3 6-year-old children standing in the center of a ballroom full of adults, their violet eyes reflecting the light like mirrors reflecting truth. "The man asked our mother what our chances were," Emma said, her voice as clear and steady as her brother's. "And when she told him, he looked at us lying in those machines, and do you know what he said to himself?" Marcus's throat closed. He couldn't remember saying anything out loud, but these children were claiming they could hear thoughts, which was scientifically impossible, medically implausible, completely. He said, "Thank God those aren't my problems," Evan finished, his violet eyes boring into Marcus's soul. He looked at our mother's broken heart and our dying bodies, and he felt relief that he wasn't burdened with such weakness. The gasp that went up from the crowd was audible. Several guests turned to stare at Marcus with expressions ranging from disgust to shock. Victoria's face had gone white as her wedding dress, her mouth hanging open in horror. That's not." Marcus started to speak, but his voice cracked, because he did remember now. He remembered that exact thought, fleeting and cruel, as he'd looked at the struggling infants and felt grateful for his own unencumbered life. But how could they possibly know that? How could 3 children remember thoughts that had never been spoken aloud? "We know because we're not like other children," Ethan said, as if reading Marcus's mind, which Marcus was beginning to realize with growing terror might be exactly what was happening. The machines that kept us alive, the electricity that restarted our hearts 17 times, the experimental treatments that saved our brains, they changed us, made us into something new. "Something better," Emma added softly. "Something that can see the truth in people's hearts," Evan concluded. Marcus looked desperately around the ballroom, seeking an ally, an escape, anything that might save him from this supernatural tribunal. But every face looked back at him with judgment, with the dawning realization that he had indeed invited this family here to humiliate them, and that his cruelty was being repaid in ways he never could have imagined. "Mr. Blackstone," Ethan said formally, "you brought us here because you wanted to feel powerful. You wanted to prove that your wealth makes you better than people like our mother, who worked 16-hour days to keep us fed and housed and loved." Sarah had reached the edge of the dance floor, tears streaming down her face. "Children, please," she whispered. "That's enough." But the triplets weren't finished. "What you don't understand," Emma said, her violet eyes never leaving Marcus's face, "is that our mother is worth more than everyone in this room combined. She sacrificed everything for us. She believed in us when doctors said we were hopeless. She loved us when the world said we were broken. And you? Evan said, his 6-year-old voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment. You tried to use her goodness as entertainment for your cruelty. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Marcus felt as if he were standing naked in front of the entire world, his sins exposed, his soul laid bare by 3 children who shouldn't exist, who couldn't possibly know the things they knew, who were systematically destroying everything he'd built his identity around. And then Ethan smiled, a gentle, forgiving expression that was somehow more devastating than any accusation. "But it's okay, Mr. Blackstone," he said softly, "because our mother taught us that even cruel people can learn to be better. Even hearts made of stone can be broken open to let the light in." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been frozen solid for decades suddenly beginning to thaw in the warmth of this impossible child's forgiveness. But before he could respond, before he could begin to process what was happening to him, Victoria's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Security!" she screamed, her face twisted with rage and humiliation. "Remove these people immediately. This is my wedding, and I will not have it ruined by some freak show." 6 security guards in black suits began moving toward the children, their intentions clear. And that's when the triplets did something that made everyone in the ballroom question everything they thought they knew about reality. They began to glow. The glow emanating from the 3 children wasn't harsh or blinding. It was soft, ethereal, like moonlight filtered through crystal. It began at their skin and radiated outward in gentle waves, bathing the entire ballroom in an otherworldly luminescence that made the expensive chandeliers seem crude and artificial by comparison. The 6 security guards stopped dead in their tracks, their hands frozen halfway to their radios. 300 of the most powerful people in the city sat transfixed, their mouths agape, their sophisticated worldviews crumbling in the face of something that simply couldn't exist according to everything they thought they knew about reality. Victoria's scream died in her throat. Her wedding dress, which had cost more than most people's cars, suddenly seemed like a costume in a play that had just been interrupted by actual magic. What are they?" whispered Governor Peterson, his political composure completely shattered. The triplets stood hand in hand in the center of the dance floor, their violet eyes now literally luminous, their platinum hair seeming to float as if suspended in water. The light pulsed gently with each beat of their hearts, synchronized perfectly, 3 beings somehow operating as one magnificent entity. Marcus felt his knees buckle. This was beyond anything his rational mind could process. He was a man of science and technology, a person who dealt in facts and data and profit margins. Children didn't glow. Children couldn't read minds. Children couldn't. "Mr. Blackstone." Ethan's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through the ballroom without the use of his vocal cords. "5 years ago, you made a choice in that hospital room. You chose to turn away from suffering because it was inconvenient to your schedule. Today," Emma's voice joined her brother's, creating a harmony that resonated in frequencies that touched something deeper than hearing. "You made another choice. You chose cruelty over kindness, pride over compassion. But choices can be unmade," Evan added, his luminous form stepping forward. "Hearts can be changed. Souls can be redeemed. Even yours." The light from the children began to intensify, not painfully, but with the kind of warmth that penetrates to the bone. Several guests began to weep without understanding why. Others found themselves remembering moments from their own lives when they had chosen selfishness over service, wealth over wisdom, power over love. Sarah stood at the edge of the dance floor, tears streaming down her face. She had kept her children's secret for 6 years, moving from city to city whenever their abilities became too obvious, always running, always hiding, always afraid of what the world would do if it knew the truth. But now the truth was blazing in front of 300 witnesses and there was no going back. "Children," she whispered, but her voice carried in the supernatural silence. "Please, this isn't safe. People will want to study you, experiment on you." "No one will hurt us, Mama," Emma said, her glowing form turning toward her mother with infinite gentleness. "Not anymore. It's time for hiding to end. Marcus found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. How? How is this possible? Ethan's luminous eyes fixed on him with something that might have been pity. When we were dying in those machines, something reached out to us. Something that exists in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause between thoughts, in the moment between despair and hope. We were offered a choice, Emma continued. We could let go and find peace, or we could stay and become something new. Something that could help heal the broken places in the world. We chose to stay, Evan said simply. We chose to become bridges between what is and what could be. The security guards had backed away completely now, their training useless in the face of the impossible. Victoria had sunk into her chair, her perfect wedding destroyed, her social standing crumbling as every phone in the room recorded what was happening. But Marcus barely noticed the chaos around him. He was lost in the children's luminous gaze, feeling something fundamental shifting inside his chest. The armor he'd built around his heart over decades of ruthless ambition was cracking, letting in light he'd forgotten could exist. I don't understand, he said, his voice breaking. Why are you doing this? I tried to hurt you. I wanted to humiliate your mother. I deserve your anger, not your whatever this is. This is love, Ethan said, and the word resonated through the ballroom like a bell tolling across water. Love doesn't require worthiness, Mr. Blackstone. It simply is. But love also requires truth, Emma added. And the truth is that you've spent your entire adult life running from the pain of your own childhood, building walls of wealth and power to protect yourself from ever feeling small and helpless again. Marcus staggered backward as if he'd been physically struck. How could they possibly know? He'd never told anyone about the foster homes, about the years of being passed from family to family, about the night when he was 7 years old and decided that if the world was going to be cruel, he would be crueler. The truth is, Evan continued, his glowing form somehow encompassing infinite compassion, that the scared little boy inside you never learned that being vulnerable doesn't mean being weak, that needing others doesn't make you less than, that love isn't something that has to be earned through perfection. The light from the children pulsed brighter, and suddenly Marcus wasn't standing in a ballroom anymore. He was 7 years old again, sitting in a corner of his 4th foster home, watching his temporary parents laugh and joke with their biological children while he remained invisible, unwanted, a burden they were paid to bear. I'll show them, his 7-year-old self had whispered in the darkness. I'll get so rich and so powerful that they'll all wish they'd been nice to me. They'll all be sorry they didn't want me. But 50-year-old Marcus, standing in this impossible moment, finally understood the flaw in his 7-year-old logic. All the money in the world couldn't fill the hole left by love withheld. All the power on earth couldn't heal the wound of never feeling worthy of affection. I'm so sorry, he whispered, and the words seemed to come from someplace deeper than his throat, deeper than his mind, from the very center of his being. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I was trying to prove I was better than you, but the truth is I've always known you were better than me. You and your incredible children. The glow from the triplets began to settle, becoming softer, more gentle. They released each other's hands, and the supernatural harmony of their voices faded back to the normal speech of 6-year-old children. That's why we came tonight, Mr. Blackstone, Ethan said, his voice now clearly that of a little boy, though his words carried ancient wisdom. Not to embarrass you back, not to get revenge, but to help you remember who you really are underneath all that fear and anger. Who am I? Marcus asked, genuinely uncertain for the first time in decades. Emma smiled, a radiant expression that had nothing to do with supernatural light and everything to do with the pure joy of a child who sees good in the world. You're someone who could choose differently. You're someone who could use his gifts to build instead of tear down. You're someone who could still learn to love. But before Marcus could respond, before he could begin to process the magnitude of what had just happened to his understanding of reality and his understanding of himself, a new voice cut through the ballroom. Fascinating, said Dr. Elizabeth Vance, stepping out from behind one of the marble columns where she'd been watching everything unfold. Absolutely fascinating. Marcus recognized her immediately. Dr. Vance was a government scientist he'd met at several high-level meetings, a woman whose security clearance was higher than most generals, whose work involved things the public was never meant to know about. And the expression on her face as she looked at the glowing children was not one of wonder or compassion. It was the expression of someone who had just found exactly what she'd been looking for. Dr. Elizabeth Vance stepped into the center of the ballroom with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. She was a tall, severe woman in her 50s, her silver hair pulled back in a precise bun, her black suit tailored to perfection. But it was her eyes that made everyone uncomfortable, pale blue and calculating, the eyes of someone who saw people as specimens rather than souls. "Children," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who expected immediate obedience. "My name is Dr. Vance. I work for a very important government organization that helps special people like you." Sarah's blood turned to ice. This was her worst nightmare, the scenario that had kept her awake at night for 6 years, the reason they'd moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough for anyone to ask too many questions about her extraordinary children. "Stay away from them," Sarah said, stepping protectively in front of the triplets. But her voice shook with terror, and everyone in the room could hear it. Dr. Vance smiled, a cold, professional expression that never reached her eyes. "Mrs. Mitchell, isn't it? I've been tracking your family for quite some time. Did you really think you could keep children with these abilities hidden forever?" "They're just kids," Sarah whispered. But even as she said it, she knew how futile the words were. Everyone in the ballroom had just witnessed something that defied every law of physics, every understanding of human capability. "Oh, they're much more than that," Dr. Vance replied, circling the family like a predator studying prey. "According to our research, they're the first confirmed case of spontaneous human enhancement triggered by near-death trauma. Do you have any idea how valuable that makes them to national security?" Marcus found his voice, though it came out stronger than he felt. "Dr. Vance, with all due respect, these are children at a private wedding." "Whatever authority you think you have here." "Mr. Blackstone," Dr. Vance interrupted smoothly, "my authority supersedes your property rights, your wealth, and your influence. These children represent a potential breakthrough in human evolution. They're coming with me." The triplets had been standing silently through this exchange, their violet eyes moving from face to face, reading expressions and intentions with their supernatural perception. Now Ethan stepped forward, his 6-year-old frame somehow commanding despite its small size. "Dr. Vance," he said politely, "we know who you are. We know what you do. We know about the facility in Nevada where you keep people like us." Dr. Vance's professional composure slipped for just a moment. "That's classified information, child. There's no way you could possibly—" "We know about Subject 7, Emma said quietly, the little girl who could see through walls. "We know what happened to her when your experiments went too far." "We know about Subject 12, Evan added, the boy who could move things with his mind. "We know how he died screaming in your laboratory." The color drained from Dr. Vance's face. The information the children had just revealed was beyond top secret. It was known only to herself and 3 other people in the entire government, and none of them were anywhere near this ballroom. "How do you—" "That's impossible," she whispered. "Nothing is impossible," the triplets said in unison, their voices creating that supernatural harmony again. "You just don't understand the rules yet." Around the ballroom, the wealthy guests were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something far more significant than a disrupted wedding. Cell phones appeared as people began recording everything, though several discovered that their devices were mysteriously malfunctioning whenever they tried to focus on the glowing children. Governor Peterson stood up from his table, his political instincts finally overriding his shock. "Dr. Vance, I don't know what authority you think you have here, but these are American citizens at a private event. You can't just—" "Actually, Governor," Dr. Vance said, producing a leather folder from her jacket, "I can. Presidential Emergency Order 14823. Any individuals displaying supernatural abilities are to be immediately detained for the protection of national security." She handed the folder to Peterson, who read it with growing alarm. This is real," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This gives you unlimited authority to do whatever is necessary. Dr. Vance finished. Now, children, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Come with me peacefully and your mother won't be charged as a terrorist for harboring dangerous individuals. Sarah let out a sob. 6 years of running, 6 years of protecting her children, and it was ending here, at a billionaire's wedding, in front of 300 witnesses who would either stay silent or be silenced. But Marcus Blackstone, standing in the ruins of his carefully constructed life, made a choice that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. No, he said, stepping between Dr. Vance and the family. Absolutely not. Dr. Vance raised an eyebrow. Mr. Blackstone, you're interfering with a federal operation. That's a felony that could cost you everything you've built. Then let it cost me everything, Marcus said, and for the first time in his adult life he meant it. These children showed me something tonight that's worth more than all my wealth combined. They showed me what it looks like to choose love over fear, compassion over cruelty. I won't let you turn them into weapons or experiments. How touching, Dr. Vance said dryly, but ultimately irrelevant. She raised her hand to signal the federal agents who had been waiting outside, hidden among the legitimate security staff. But before she could complete the gesture, something extraordinary happened. Every single person in the ballroom stood up. Governor Peterson, 3 senators, Hollywood celebrities, tech moguls, society matrons, business tycoons, people who had spent their entire lives protecting their own interests, who had never risked anything for anyone they couldn't profit from. All of them, as one, stepped forward to form a protective circle around Sarah and her children. "You'll have to go through all of us," announced Victoria Pemberton, her wedding dress torn and her makeup ruined, but her voice stronger than it had ever been. "These children are under our protection." Dr. Vance stared in disbelief. "You people have no idea what you're dealing with. These children are potentially dangerous." They could teach us how to be better," interrupted Robert Pemberton, Victoria's brother. "They could show us what we're supposed to be." "They already have," added Senator Richardson, a man known for his ruthless political maneuvering. "In 10 minutes, these children have done more to restore my faith in humanity than 30 years in Washington." Dr. Vance realized she was facing something she hadn't anticipated, not just supernatural children, but the spontaneous moral awakening of some of the most powerful people in the country. People who could make her life very difficult if they chose to. But she had her orders, and she had never failed to complete a mission. "Stand down, all of you," she said, her voice carrying a new edge of menace. "Or face the consequences." That's when the triplets began to glow again, but this time it was different. This time, the light wasn't just coming from them. It was flowing through them to touch every person in that protective circle. And as the light touched each person, something miraculous happened. They began to remember every act of kindness they'd ever performed, every moment of genuine love they'd ever felt, every time they'd chosen good over evil, hope over despair, connection over isolation. The light reminded them of who they really were underneath all their fears and ambitions and defenses. "This is who you are," Ethan's voice whispered through their minds. "This is who you've always been. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Dr. Vance watched in growing alarm as 300 of the most influential people in the country underwent a simultaneous spiritual awakening. This was beyond anything she'd been prepared for, beyond any scenario her superiors had considered. She reached for her radio to call for backup, but found that her hand wouldn't obey her brain. She tried to speak, but no sound emerged from her throat. The children weren't just reading her thoughts, they were preventing her from acting on them. "Dr. Vance," Emma said gently, "you can choose differently too. You can remember that the little girl you experimented on had a name. Rebecca. She was 7 years old and she missed her mother. The boy who died in your laboratory," Evan added, "was called Tommy. He liked to draw pictures of animals. His favorite was elephants." Dr. Vance felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, tears she hadn't shed in 20 years. "Stop," she whispered. "Just stop." "We'll stop," Ethan promised, "when you remember that science without compassion isn't science at all. It's just cruelty with credentials." But before Dr. Vance could respond, Before she could grapple with the weight of her crimes being laid bare by 6-year-old children, alarms began blaring throughout the estate. Her backup had arrived. And they were bringing more than handcuffs. The sound of helicopters thundered overhead as federal agents in tactical gear stormed through every entrance of the Grandview estate. Dr. Vance's backup wasn't a simple arrest team. It was a full military-style operation designed to contain what the government considered a supernatural threat to national security. In the ballroom, the 300 most powerful people in the country found themselves facing a choice that would define not just their own futures, but the future of humanity itself. Stand with 3 extraordinary children and face the full wrath of a government gone mad with fear, or step aside and let innocence be taken to a fate worse than death. Marcus Blackstone stood at the front of the protective circle, his expensive tuxedo torn, his carefully styled hair disheveled but his resolve stronger than steel. For the first time in his adult life, he was fighting for something more important than money or power. He was fighting for love. "Sarah," he called over the chaos. "Is there another way out of here?" Sarah clutched her children close, her mind racing through the estate's layout. "The service corridors," she said. "But they'll have those covered too." "Not all of them," Victoria said, surprising everyone, including herself. "There's a passage that leads from the wine cellar to the old carriage house. My great-grandfather built it during Prohibition. Most people don't even know it exists." The tactical team was getting closer. They could hear boots on marble, the crackle of radio communications, the sound of doors being kicked in. Dr. Vance stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, tears streaming down her face as the weight of her crimes crashed down on her consciousness. That's when Ethan did something that changed everything. He walked over to Dr. Vance and took her hand. The moment their skin touched, the ballroom filled with light so brilliant that everyone had to shield their eyes. But it wasn't harsh or painful. It was the light of absolute truth, of perfect understanding, of love so pure it could transform even the most hardened heart. In that light, Dr. Vance saw everything. She saw Rebecca, the 7-year-old girl whose abilities she'd tried to weaponize, dying alone and afraid in a sterile laboratory. She saw Tommy, the boy who could move objects with his mind, his heart stopping under the stress of experiments that pushed his developing brain beyond its limits. She saw herself as she really was, not a patriot protecting her country, but a monster hiding behind good intentions. But she also saw something else. She saw what she could become. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." "We know," Emma said, taking her other hand. "But sorry isn't enough anymore. Now you have to choose what you're going to do about it." Evan completed the connection, the 3 children surrounding Dr. Vance in a triangle of impossible light. "You can help us," he said. "You can tell them to stand down. You can use your authority to protect instead of destroy." The tactical team had reached the ballroom doors. Marcus could hear them taking positions, preparing to storm in. In seconds, this would become a battle zone, and innocents would be hurt. "Dr. Vance," he said urgently, "you have to decide now. Are you going to let them turn these children into weapons, or are you going to help us save them?" "Dr." Vance looked around the ballroom at 300 faces staring at her with hope and desperation. These people, titans of industry, political leaders, cultural icons, were all looking to her for salvation. Not because of her government credentials, but because she was the only one who could stop what was about to happen. She thought about Rebecca, about Tommy, about all the others whose names she'd tried so hard to forget. She thought about the children she'd destroyed in the name of national security. And she thought about these 3 extraordinary beings who somehow still believed she could be redeemed. "Agent Morrison," she said into her radio, her voice steady for the first time in years. "This is Dr. Vance. Stand down. I repeat, stand down immediately." The voice that crackled back was filled with confusion. "Ma'am, we have confirmation of supernatural activity. Our orders are to—" "Our orders have changed, Doctor," Vance said, looking into Ethan's violet eyes and finding strength she'd forgotten she possessed. "The subjects are not hostile. They are children, American citizens, and they are under my personal protection. Any agent who harms them will answer to me personally. There was a long pause, then, "Understood, ma'am," standing down. The sound of retreating boots echoed through the mansion. The helicopters pulled back. The siege was over, but the transformation was just beginning. In the days that followed, the story of what happened at Marcus Blackstone's wedding spread around the world like wildfire. Videos taken by guests went viral despite mysterious technical glitches that made the supernatural elements appear as strange lighting effects. The mainstream media dismissed it as an elaborate hoax, but those who had been there knew the truth. Marcus liquidated half his fortune within a week, establishing the Mitchell Foundation for Gifted Children, a sanctuary for young people with abilities that the world wasn't ready to understand. Sarah became the foundation's director, using her experience as a protective mother to help other families navigate the impossible challenges of raising extraordinary children. Dr. Vance resigned from her government position and dedicated her life to documenting and protecting children with supernatural abilities. Her insider knowledge proved invaluable in keeping them safe from other agencies that might try to exploit them. But the most remarkable change was in the 300 wedding guests who had witnessed the children's light. Within 6 months, they had quietly orchestrated the largest humanitarian effort in modern history. Poverty programs, educational initiatives, environmental restoration projects, all funded and managed by people who had remembered what it meant to care about something bigger than themselves. Victoria and Marcus never did get married that day. Instead, Victoria started a foundation for children aging out of foster care, while Marcus spent his time learning to be the kind of man his 7-year-old self had needed someone to be. As for the triplets, they returned to being relatively normal 6-year-olds, if you could call children who occasionally glowed and could read minds normal. They went to school, played with friends, and argued about bedtime just like any other kids. But sometimes, late at night when the world was quiet, they would stand together in their backyard and let their light shine up to the stars, sending a message to whatever force had saved them in that hospital 5 years ago. The message was simple: mission accomplished, hearts opened, hope restored, love wins. And somewhere in the space between heartbeats, between thoughts, between despair and hope, that force smiled back at them and whispered the words that had started it all. "Well done, my beautiful children, well done." Marcus often visited the foundation, not as a donor seeking recognition, but as a volunteer learning to connect with the children who reminded him of his own wounded inner child. Sarah watched him sometimes, amazed at how completely a heart could change when touched by the right light. The children had taught them all the most important lesson of all: that love doesn't require worthiness, perfection, or understanding. Love simply requires the courage to let it in. And that courage, once found, has the power to transform not just individuals, but the entire world.